Greetings, everyone. My name is Peter Young. I'm on the board of Societe de Chimie Industrielle and also the head of programs. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome you to this wonderful panel on the lithium supply and the effect it'll have. We had a huge number of people register for this. So obviously, there's a great deal of interest in the topic. I'm just going to briefly say two things. One of this, which most of you are quite familiar with Societe de Chimie Industrielle, but those who are not, it's a 103-year-old nonprofit that serves the chemical and life science industries. And we have multiple programs, whether it's these kinds of programs where we want to educate the public and industry executives and students, but also we have a scholarship program where we give research scholarships to a large number of students studying either undergraduate or graduate, studying chemical engineering or biotech or chemicals, and mentorship programs. And then also we have the International Palladium Medal Dinner, which awards someone who's really distinguished themselves in terms of contributing to the causes of Societe. Those of you who are not members, I encourage you to join. The membership fee is very modest. And we do hope to start in-person meetings, possibly hybrid as well, starting in the fall, if COVID-19 cooperates. So with that, I just want to say one other thing, which is the upcoming program is on June 6th, an equally hot topic, and it's on the major trends and innovations in green and circular chemistry. And that's a really hot topic as well, because there's so much positive desire to shift things in ways that are less toxic and more based on renewables or recycling of waste plastic. But also there's a lot of pressure on the industry to try to become more green and follow more ESG type of principles. So I encourage you, those who are interested in the topic, to register for the event on June 6th. With that, let me turn it over to Mark Reich, who is a long-term board member. He is the one who put this program together today, and he also happens to be head of the education committee, which in fact manages all the scholarships and student activities. So Mark, please, I turn it over to you.
Yes, hello. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We have three excellent speakers who will talk to us a bit about the lithium situation. We were just talking a bit before as we were starting up our meeting just with the speakers separately on talking a bit about the price of lithium, how it's gone up so dramatically from $17,000 a ton in 2021 to recently as high as $78,000 a ton. And I think we've got an excellent group of people who can give us some perspective on that. We have here Max Reid, who focuses on the battery supply chain at the consulting firm Wood Mackenzie. He's got a interesting past, worked for Connecticut, which is a spin out from the UK's Defense Research Agency, and he'll have some interesting perspective for us on what's happening overall on lithium. Then we're joined as well by Glen Merfeld, who leads all lithium research at Albemarle, one of the leading lithium producers on this planet, and he'll give us some perspective on what Albemarle is doing to increase lithium supply, the investments it's making in lithium, and on improvements in lithium extraction technology. And then as well, we have Mitch Jaboby, a CNN senior correspondent, I believe, been with the American Chemical Society publication for about 25 years and has written quite a bit about lithium battery developments, new research, and a very interesting article recently back in September on lithium extraction from seawater. And so I'd like to ask Max Reid to please start and tell us a bit about the lithium market and situation. I'll speak for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll hear from Glen Merfeld and Mitch Jaboby. Max, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much, Mark and Peter, and welcome everyone. So, as Mark said, my name is Max Reid. I'm a research analyst here at Wood Mackenzie's energy consultancy and energy research firm, and I'm sitting in the battery raw materials team, so covering lithium as well as cobalt, nickel, graphite, manganese, and sort of across the value chain as well. So today I'm going to give a sort of a brief overview of our outlook for the lithium market. So to begin with, obviously supply and demand and what our long-term views are. So to start off with, lithium demand is obviously driven in two parts by our global energy transition. Obviously, electric vehicles that everyone knows about is a sort of a low carbon alternative to what historically we've been using combustion-based vehicles, using these quite large battery packs filled with lithium-ion batteries, and you can't get away from using lithium in these lithium-ion batteries. It's a really energy dense element. And then on the other side, stationary storage sector will see a huge amount of growth when it's tied with renewable energy, which obviously is going to grow as well. So heading on into sort of the first overview of demand for lithium-ion batteries. To begin with, in 2020, we saw 92% of vehicle sales were internal combustion engine based vehicles, but we actually see quite a huge growth in the electric vehicle segment to 2030 and onwards. So going from 3% battery electric vehicle sales in 2020 up to 22% in 2030. And combined with plug-in hybrids, we see that at about a 30% penetration of electric vehicles into the global sort of transport, passenger car and commercial vehicle market. And I just see on the right-hand side the effect of this on lithium commodity demand. So you see in 2022 was only 604 kilotons lithium carbonate equivalent of demand for lithium. This is going to increase by quite an exorbitant amount to 2040, so over nearly 3,500 kilotons LCE. And really that's going to be driven by the secondary battery market. So secondary batteries, rechargeable batteries will include electric vehicles, stationary storage, as well as the devices that you'll be very well aware of: laptops, phones, notebooks, and even sort of 2- and 3-wheelers as well. We see coming into the market too. But even though quite a large proportion of that's coming from secondary batteries, electric vehicles will make up about 76% of the demand increase. So there's no reason, there's no, it's not difficult to see why the whole industry is talking about electric vehicles. And really that part of the growth is not just because of the size of vehicle sales that we're going to see, but is also the size of battery packs in an electric vehicle. So around 60 kilowatt hours of batteries is, I think I did the rough maths, which is about the energy of 200 sticks of dynamite. So it's quite a lot of energy that you're going to be putting into your EV. I hope that doesn't put you off getting one. Now into the supply side, those of you who know the lithium industry well will know that it comes from mainly two sources: your brine sources and your mineral concentrates. So your minerals will include spodumene, which is the well-known case, but also lepidolites, petalites, clays. So spodumene mined in China and Australia, and as you can see here on the left-hand side, in 2022 we expect around 82% of mineral supply to come from Australia, and I'm sure Glen's going to go into far more detail about that in his presentation. But the real outlook for the mineral supply is greater diversity in terms of a geographical split for mineral supply out to 2030 and beyond. So we see that there's been a lot of investment into new mines and projects certainly in Africa and North America. And this really is because there's plenty of lithium around, it's just accessing it. So whilst historically we've been using lithium that's mostly been mined from Australia and China, that the extra demand that we're going to see, particularly from the electric vehicles market, is going to spur on the need for new demand in new locations as well. And we expect new mines in Canada and Africa, and as well as Brazil, to mature sort of towards the middle of this decade to start production and to come into its own right in the global scale. And on the right hand side you can see lithium chemical production by region. So this is including brine sources as well as lithium that's come from minerals that's been sort of converted and refined into lithium chemicals. And lithium chemicals is sort of the commodity that we look at in terms of supply, because lithium in carbonate and hydroxide form is the sort of the form of lithium that goes into batteries, and that's a sort of a good gauge of the supply of lithium each year. And as you can see, China is really dominating this. So at the moment, it's a lot higher than this, and I'll go into this in a bit more detail. But we're going to see in 2030 still a China story in terms of lithium chemical production. Now, in South America, it's very well known, these large brine deposits in sort of the Atacama Desert and elsewhere. So you see Chile and Argentina being the next top producers. And then Australia's now expanding its own refining industry sort of inside the country. So historically, spodumene would be delivered to China to be refined and processed, but we've seen Kwinana, I believe, come online in the last year to actually refine minerals into lithium hydroxide in Australia to then be used further. And this is part of the picture they're going to be seeing in the future, which is seeing a refining capacity or capability develop outside of China. So going on into sort of the general global overall balance in the long-term picture, which is really what is going to be quite interesting going forwards, is seeing that we're going to enter a deficit for lithium, and I think everyone's pretty well agreed with this, and we see that coming into sort of towards the end of this decade, so 2029 or 2030 onwards, using our base case and other scenarios in lithium production. And you can see that lithium demand is not going to go away. Even out to 2040, it's going to be increasing. And this is in part because of an increasing number of vehicle sales in total, as well as an increasing penetration of electric vehicles in those vehicle sales. And then also the stationary storage segment is also going to keep growing. So the long-term picture is seeing that we need to we need to improve investment into the lithium mining industry to actually be able to tackle demand that's going to come. And I've included recycling here in red outside of traditional supply as a secondary supply, because it gains a lot of traction in the industry. And from what we see, we only see significant supply coming from the recycling industry, coming from 2030 onwards. Now, this is in part for two reasons. So electric vehicles that are being made today might have an 8 to 10 year lifespan. So it means that the lithium that goes into electric vehicles today, you'd only be able to access in about 8 to 10 years. So that's one part, just the long lifespan of electric vehicle. The second part is the relatively low EV sales today than what will be in 2030 and 2040. So as I showed before, the vast increase in lithium demand from the electric vehicle segment and electric vehicle sales. So it means that you're trying to tackle demand for electric vehicles and other sources in 2030 using sort of end-of-life EV batteries that were produced in 2020. So it's a real mismatch, and it's always trying to catch up, as you can see. Another source of lithium from recycling is from sort of scrap and recycling and upcycling lithium that falls off a line. So during lithium refining, cathode production, cell production, and even EV production, all these waste batteries and waste materials are going to come off a line. And part of that, we do see players looking to use that lithium, or use those materials which contain lithium back into the supply chain. But again, really the scale of production now is much lower than what it will be in 2030, so it's struggling to keep up. So that's a real challenge for recycling to actually keep up with lithium demand. I've also highlighted in red, and as Mark mentioned, the high lithium prices at the moment. So we saw in 2021 really high EV sales, and more so than analysts really expected. And that's in part because obviously it's coming out of this global pandemic, and EV sales are really stunted during that. And we've seen a rebound in the number of sales, certainly in China as well. but it's a mismatch between the demand in terms of EV sales and what's been able to supply those sales. So we've seen, because of the lags that happen through the lithium supply chain, you're seeing it could take sort of half a year up for a year for lithium to come from a mine site through to being installed into an EV. So really it's the lithium supply industry in general has been struggling to expand production and capacity to meet this extra demand. That being said, we have seen a huge number of announcements in the last half of the year, certainly in Australia, and then projects in South America and China expanding as well. So we do expect this deficit to enter a surplus.
Max, so we've got to move on a little bit. Could
Sure, yeah.
you wrap it up at this point?
Sure, yes, yeah, I'm happy to do that, and I'll happy to move on to Glen in the next segment. But
any final comment on the situation?
Yeah, so in a general, very short sentence, is seeing some investment into these new sources of lithium, but certainly not enough. So, for instance, America has got quite a lot of lithium reserves that are relatively untapped at the moment, and we've seen a lack of investment in that. But that being said, into the future, obviously, with Biden's plan for sort of increasing self-sufficiency in the battery space, we do expect that further developments to occur. But thank you for supporting me, and with that, I'll concede and move on to Glen.
Thanks very much. Please, Glen, go ahead.
Yeah, excellent. Hey, I'm gonna see if I can't similarly just show a couple of charts here. Let me know if you're able to see that okay. Does that work out okay?
Yes.
There we go. You're seeing my screen okay, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Hey, I just have two charts, and the first chart really is to talk about the lithium value chain, minerals to market. This is really kind of a phenomenal breadth, and the chart that I'll bring up right behind this will talk a little bit more to the technology that's behind this. So I've got a terrific job. I get to do technology all the way from the left-hand side of this chart, and our team works on our resources, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we do there, all the way to the right-hand side, and the integration of our materials developments, really all the way to the end user is really important. And I think that's part of, I think, the opportunity and the challenge that I think it's important to frame up in this context. So the value chain, as Max really nicely laid out, there's concentration of lithium around the world. It's actually plentiful in concept, but in reality, it's concentrated in a few areas of the world that make it a little bit more advantageous to focus on. That's in Western Australia, the hard rock resources in South America, the brine resources there. There's some really interesting resources in the western part of the United States. There's some attractive resources up in Canada, and then otherwise it's relatively spread out over the world. We have a very good fortune and really a high responsibility because we operate with some of the highest concentration, largest lithium resources in the world. But how we manage those and utilize every atom of lithium is what I like to remind our team is really cutting edge technology that helps us understand what the resources under the ground looks like, the geology or the brine basins, and how we can most sustainably get access to the lithium. And an important part of that, and you'll appreciate this from a chemistry standpoint, for every kilogram that we mine, how do we make sure that we recover the most amount of lithium? So some just phenomenal technology associated with that. But once you liberate the lithium from its host material, you need to concentrate it. And there's more than 8 different families of technologies that you can use to concentrate and purify lithium. There's technologies that people like to call direct lithium extraction technologies that are a subset of this larger family. And so those routes, I think, are really important as well, because again, every step through this process as we go through the value chain here, our ability to recover it and get high yields of lithium from every step really matter. And you'll appreciate the math. It compounds as you go from left to right here. The next part, though, of the value chain is where you get into the conversion process, where you essentially take your lithium and you make a refined version of it. We talk about it in terms of conversion assets around the world. And as was mentioned, predominantly for batteries, it's either a form of lithium hydroxide or lithium carbonate. But there's other forms of lithium that increasingly could play a bigger and bigger role, not only in the cathode side of the battery, but also in the anode side of the battery. So we can speak to this a little bit. But here's the way I would describe it. As batteries get more precisely engineered and tuned so that we're putting more and more energy in the same volume, the materials that you're using so also must be more precisely engineered. So we think about, even in the materials that we sell today, how do we do a better job controlling surface area, morphology, particle size distributions, and you can really even go even deeper than that. And all of those sort of refined engineering for quality and reliability and performance, they matter. And there's unfortunately, quite a bit of loss of lithium in that part of the value chain today. From when we sell it to our end users, there's this opportunity to do a better job, and that's part of the partnerships that we're developing with our customers. But as you go to the right-hand side here, one of the things that we like to talk about are physics-based models that really help us understand when we refine our lithium and we create more high-performance versions of it, how much additional value can we provide at the battery level and even at the end-use level. So the scale of what we do in technology starts at the resources, it goes through the conversion chemistries, it gets into the type of advanced materials. Hundreds of derivatives of lithium are possible. The other thing that I'll mention is we spend quite a bit of effort on data science, because just a tremendous amount of opportunity to do a better job of understanding the lithium ecosystem. And really, this is kind of a eye candy type chart, because what I want to illustrate here is, these are some of the technologies that our team does to make sure, and we work on and are leaders in the world, because we think it's really important to make sure as we expand our resources, we do it in a way that's optimized and sustainable. Things like hydrogeology, and particularly in our brine resources, as you can appreciate, helps us do a better job of managing and doing that with the environment in mind. Extraction, there's conventional ways to do this that actually are very good when it comes to water usage and when it comes to electricity usage. When we get into alternative forms of extracting and refining, we got to make sure that we're thinking about these trade-offs and thinking about in terms of recovery and productivity. Advanced materials, there's some phenomenal progress that's going on just in the last 18 to 24 months on new materials that do things like pre-lithiation that allow you to make better use of every kilogram of active material in your batteries. Things like also on the anode side of the battery, moving to forms of lithium like lithium metal that actually opens up a whole new range of performance. All of this, I think when you take a step back, you have to realize we're introducing new materials into new markets. So part of the innovation is also in our business models. So we think about this in terms of novel ways of working with our end-use customers. And then finally, as I mentioned in the lower right-hand corner, really being able to link the ecosystem all the way from the mine to the market, connect, and really almost have a mass balance on every kilogram of lithium that's mined in the world, where it's at. And then really important is to have these physics-based performance models that link, hey, what's possible technically to what really matters to our customers. So that's the span of how I think about technology. It's just a tremendous space with phenomenal growth.
Glenn, could you give us an idea of how much money Albemarle has invested in its Australian venture, and what the state of the project is there now?
Yeah, it's a great question mark, and I would refer you more to our public disclosures on that. I want to make sure that I don't get into areas that we haven't publicly disclosed. So I'm going to pass on providing any more details than what's already out there. Not to be evasive, I just don't want to give the wrong information.
No problem. But the Australian project is quite large. It's in Kemerton, isn't it?
Yeah, we're investing, just generally, we're investing billions of dollars to expand our conversion assets around the world. So to your point, there's significant investments in all those regions where we have conversion assets today, and also really we're feeling the localization pull from our customer base as well, asking us to really think about locally, can we develop resources that are in closer proximity to the electric vehicle manufacturing. And then additionally, if you're developing the resources, it's really important to think about how do you convert it to the final product.
Have you been exploring some of those resources you mentioned in the Western United States?
Absolutely. So one of the areas where we have current production today is in a really impressive brine resource that's in Clayton Valley, Nevada. And we produce lithium out of that resource today. And we announced, I think, a couple of years ago now that we're doubling the capacity out of that site as well, and looking into the native clay resources as well. So I mentioned that's a natural brine resource, but additionally, Nevada is a pretty exciting space because there's a lot of lithium bound up in clays.
Very, very good. Thank you. I think we'll move on now to Mitch, who'll give us some perspective on some of the new science he's aware of in lithium.
Mark, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's the first time I'm participating in one of the events of the Societe, and I'm delighted to have been asked to participate in the webinar of this prestigious organization. So thank you very much. So I was just going to say a few words about some of the research that goes on in batteries, both in the research that's being done right now to improve batteries, make them better, and something about the research that's being done to look for new sources of lithium to keep up with the demand. So we know sort of the background, and that's really where I'm doing is taking a step back for a moment here. These batteries are among the very few chemistry-based products that are often in the news and have been that way for so many years. And their key feature, as we all know, is that they can cram an awful lot of energy into a very small, lightweight, and mobile package. And those properties, I often tell people, have made them the go-to power source for billions, that's with a B, billions and billions of smartphones, laptops, tablets, all kinds of portable electronics and power tools, and more recently, electric vehicles. Now, that's a market segment that we have just heard is growing quickly. You see EVs everywhere these days on the streets, and it's projected to grow even more quickly over the next, let's say, 25 years. Now, for people who work in the industry, and I don't, the industry I work in is science journalism, but for people who work in the automobile, the EV industry, they know what these batteries look like, or for somebody who's had to replace an EV in their own car, they know what these things look like. But for the rest of them, for the rest of us, maybe we don't know what these look like. I can tell you that recently I was at Argonne National Lab, and they had a lithium-ion battery pack from a Chevy Volt open in front of them in the lab. And this thing was big. It weighed on the order of 200 kilograms, something approaching 450 pounds. Now, even though it's lithium is lighter weight than other types of battery systems, when you're talking about EVs, the packs come together to be quite substantial. So there's an awful lot of lithium going into just one vehicle, and a car like the Volt is relatively small. So even there's a lot of lithium in a very large system. So before we address the question, where is the lithium going to come from, let me just say something about the kinds of research that's going on now. Now, I have to tell you that I'm only privy to what people are willing to share with science writers and what's published in the open literature. I can't divulge any trade secrets because no one tells me any trade secrets. But I know that the area is thriving. Folks are always working on ways to make batteries that can hold relatively more charge, can recharge more quickly, last for a greater number of charging cycles, and at the same time remain relatively lightweight, very safe, and cost effective. Now that's a balancing act that's kind of tricky, and it comes about by people designing new types of cathode materials, for example, ones with varying amounts of lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, aluminum, iron, and other metals. Now, some of those cathodes use a lot less lithium, in some cases nearly half what the others use. And other active areas of research there include non-flammable electrolytes, leading to, at least at the demonstration stage, batteries that do not burst into flames when short-circuited or punctured. Also new types of electrode separators and other battery components and smart electronics to make these things run optimally. All of those things are necessary in order to continue making batteries that do the job that folks want them to do for electric vehicles. If they don't get much better than where we are today, it's not 100% clear that that market is going to continue to grow explosively. So these improvements are quite serious and things that folks are always working on. I can tell you that just within the past couple of weeks, I spoke with researchers at 2 battery startups. They're using materials that other people have used. The names of the materials are not new. What's new there is the microstructure, excuse me, the microstructure that comes about as a result of the way they synthesize and process the material. So that's yet another route to improving batteries, modifying the microstructure of the battery of the electroactive material. Both of those companies have raised a lot of money and they're moving on beyond the prototype testing stage. Okay, about sources of lithium. Recently, I had a chance to talk with folks at the US Geological Survey, and one expert I spoke with there was saying that the world's reserves of lithium, he explained that what that means is the amount that's immediately and economically available by today's extraction methods. He put the number at about 21 million metric tons. But that number immediately goes up by about a factor of 4 when you include supplies that could potentially be mined in the near term using alternative methods or using or going after sources that are a little bit harder to come by, possibly more expensive. And they include supplies that have been identified in places like Bolivia, Chile, Australia, and other countries. Now, as you alluded to earlier or in the introduction, the ocean holds something like 200 billion metric tons of lithium, something like 5,000 times more than all terrestrial sources combined. The problem is it's really dilute. It's only 180 parts per billion, and it's dwarfed by sodium, which happens to be, unfortunately, chemically similar, and it's there, and its presence is something like 60,000 times more plentiful than lithium. So whatever method you can come up with for snagging lithium, sodium is always there trying to get in the way. So researchers are working on a number of techniques. They've come up with electrochemical methods. They're using battery-like setups and materials to selectively take up or transport lithium ions from a dilute source like seawater, concentrate the metal for recovery, and then use precipitation methods to get it. And I can just tell you about a couple of studies that I know about. In one case, folks at Stanford used a lithium iron phosphate, a battery material, and a low electric current to intercalate, transport, and collect the lithium. The process involves collecting lithium from seawater and then depositing it in fresh water. And this is all done in the lab. All of this is at the lab stage. So in one case, this team, the Stanford team, used seawater, and they were able to quickly boost the lithium concentration, ending up with about a 1-to-1. Sorry about that. I'm going to have a hard time silencing the other phone. Oh man, I apologize. They were able to boost the concentration to about a 1-to-1 ratio of lithium to sodium. When this group used their method, the same method, but used a much higher concentration, a higher salt concentration water, this time from Utah's Salt Lake, they were able to boost the ratio of lithium to sodium to 50-to-1. And they say that it will cost about $2 per kilogram for the electricity to run their method. Other examples of research, another group I know is using an electrically driven method to do the separation based on lithium conducting solid electrolyte membranes. So one group of researchers, I believe in Saudi Arabia, used a lithium, lanthanum, titanium oxide membrane. And there are other materials. There are plenty of these materials out there, glass-like materials, ceramic materials that are lithium conducting. this group did the job, and they were able to boost the lithium-ion concentration in seawater samples. I think they collected them from the Red Sea by about 43,000 times to over 9,000 parts per million. Another demonstration. Other groups have come up with a redox flow battery type of setup using something like a manganese dioxide electrode. It's the same idea: selectively pick up lithium, transport it, move it over to a dilute source, increase the concentration, repeat, repeat, repeat. And in so doing, they were able to boost the concentration. And yet other groups are using things like novel polymer membranes. One example I know of is a membrane that has these selective crown ethers that pick up, they bind lithium ions selectively over sodium ions, and it's the same process. Come up with lithium from the very dilute source, concentrate it, and continue the job. Repeat it several times until you reach whatever is considered a reasonable level and stop. The key thing about all of these, again, all of these are at the demonstration phase and no further than that, or at the research phase. A key thing about them is that they seem to all work better when you start with water that's pre-concentrated. And that is something that is becoming increasingly available because of desalination plants. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there are a lot of desalination plants that have been built in recent years. And the byproduct is the brine that is, start with the seawater, remove the salts, toss the salts aside, you end up with this brine. The brine is not what's wanted, but that's a great starting material to apply these methods to selectively pick up the lithium. Okay, and as the other panelists mentioned, lithium-ion battery recycling is yet another option, although right now there's very little of it happening, but it's being worked on. And I'll just tell you very quickly that there are at least two large groups, two large consortia that I know of, one in the US. It's a DOE-sponsored program called RECELL. It has researchers, about 50 researchers altogether from national laboratories and universities. And there is a similar size program in the UK called RELIB, also with about 50 researchers at universities and national labs. And they're working on all aspects of recycling. Methods of improving the recycling steps themselves, simplifying it, robotic methods for opening the batteries, removing what you want, coming up with ways of using things. And they're also at the same time looking for markets to use the parts that aren't the electroactive materials. Okay,
Yeah, Mitch,
and I'll stop.
you've mentioned a number of different research programs going on. How often do some of these actually turn into something that's economical, practical, and commercial?
So that's a tough question to answer. I guess the answer to that is very few of them do directly, but indirectly, they do lead to bigger and bigger projects. So what you get in each of these cases, hopefully, is the germ of an idea that says, well, maybe the way to go about it is by using this kind of a membrane or by using this kind of a membrane. And someone will say, well, this is too much electricity. The Stanford group I showed you, or I mentioned to you, was, I think their calculations show that they were able to use the a lithium iron phosphate material and only about $2 per kilogram of lithium extracted from seawater for electricity costs. So it's not what you want. You want it to be far cheaper than that, but it's steps in the right direction. So the short answer to your question is, it's not happening overnight. I mean, there's going to be one or two winners, and everyone else is going to be working on the problem and hopefully contributing in their own way.
Very, very good. I'd like to ask our panelists, the rest of our panelists, to please turn on their cameras, and maybe we could have a bit of a conversation now about the lithium situation. I mean, we've been talking a bit about cost. What's the long-term cost prognosis for lithium as it's currently mined and new techniques that might be introduced, Max?
Yeah, sure. It's probably a question on a lot of people's minds. So whilst you mentioned costs of lithium carbonate and hydroxide are going up into the $60,000-$70,000 a ton at the moment, that's on the spot price, and we do expect the vast majority of lithium actually entering supply chain and going into batteries to be on a long-term supply agreements, which yes, they've increased, but not so much to that extent. So in that sense, we do expect prices to increase to around $40,000 to $50,000 a ton sort of this year and next year, as sort of the activity in the past half year sort of feeds through into new contracts, basically. But in a long term, we'll need cheaper, lower cost lithium. It's not viable to have such high lithium costs because it's going to really drive or hamper the transition towards these new vehicles, electric vehicles. At the moment, we're seeing electric vehicles reach a near price parity with combustion engine alternatives, and if that's going to sort of shy away again, we're going to see a drop. People dissuaded from taking up electric vehicles. So it will need to decrease, and part of that is to bring on more supply in a simple sense.
Glen, Albemarle has worked on techniques to become more efficient at lithium extraction and thereby lower the cost of the overall process. Could you talk a little bit about those efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, every time we can do a better job of recovering every atom of lithium from what we mine or from the concentrated brine, it's significantly helpful, not only in terms of the economics, but it's also helpful in terms of the sustainability, because you're getting more productivity for the same energy, for the same other raw material inputs. So we have programs, for example, in Chile, where we operate some natural brine resources, where we've announced that we're going to be increasing our lithium recovery from our pond systems by 15 points. So take it from 50% recovery to 65% recovery. It has a tremendous impact on all those factors. So these are the types of innovations that we're not just talking about, we're actually doing, and I think it really will have a big impact when you cascade those sort of advancements, not just to the resources that we're operating today, but also to the ones that we could be operating in the future. It has a compounding benefit on many levels.
Are you concerned that the current high prices would limit the potential for lithium longer term, and perhaps then hurt Albemarle's investment in growing lithium?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what it's going to force us to do as a world is just to be a lot more considerate of the preciousness of that material. It was mentioned before, how we use limited resources is really going to be important, and where we apply it to develop the greatest value, I think is important. There is inefficiencies and losses in the supply chain that I think we need to do better on. But overall, the cost contribution of lithium to the battery, it's very chemistry dependent. But it's a small component of their overall cost. In years past, even with the increases in pricing, that alone isn't going to make when you're buying a $50,000 or $75,000 vehicle, and you add a couple of extra $1,000 to the cost of the lithium contribution, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's not going to make the car less attractive in a large scale. If you're buying a new Tesla, for example, and it's $65,000, that's not going to be, I think, a big game changer. So these are the types of things that the world's going to have to really work through and make sure that we're balancing sort of these pressures that I think are naturally going to happen in an emerging market. And that's maybe a point that I would share here is to all of us, we feel like lithium-ion has been around for a long time because we've had it in our cell phones for decades now. But as an industry, it's relatively immature. So I don't think it's too uncommon in these emerging markets where you see, supply demand imbalances in we have this ecosystem that'll work through it. These cost points in the market will enable more investment. And those are the types of things that we want to make sure we're staying in front of.
Max, overall, do you have any sense of how large private industry's investment has been in lithium development and what it will be over time?
Yeah, so just to add on to Glen's point, he's very correct that that is a very relatively immature market at the moment. So coming from portable electronics to electric vehicles is huge bound, and as I showed in my slideshow, that the amount of lithium that you need in portable electronics is just dwarfed by what you need in electric vehicles. So we're going to see, as EV sales really hit significant volumes sort of the end of this decade, hopefully coming in junction with the maturing of the market, and I think onto that, increasing efficiencies as well, because obviously there's going to be greater inefficiencies in an immature market, and part of that was seeing recycling being used during each part of the value of the supply chain to reduce losses. In terms of investment, yes, of course, the OEMs are driving a huge amount of investment, and we've seen. So not just the lithium space, but so Volkswagen are an example of developing nickel sourcing in Indonesia, which is huge amounts of nickel materials, resources. And again, that is somewhat controversial as well, because it's going to be using these HPAL sort of environmentally slightly damaging methods, but huge sort of billions of dollars are being invested into just one aspect of the supply chain from one OEM. GM and Ford and Tesla and all the rest are doing their own. Tesla are investing in directly securing supply deals with lithium miners rather than just integrating vertically. They're going directly to the source, which is quite interesting as well. Something we don't really normally see. So yeah, and then again, into cell manufacture as well, you see a huge number of joint ventures, certainly in the US and across Europe, as electric vehicle manufacturers are building their own supply chain themselves in some aspect. So building battery gigafactories, which each cost $2 or $3 billion each.
Mark, I wonder if you let me jump in with a question.
Please, go ahead.
So, Glen, I was curious if I heard it right. It sounded like you said that Albemarle is making efforts right now to boost lithium extraction efficiency by something like 15% in some of the processes. Are you at liberty to explain how that boost is about to? That's huge.
Yeah, it is.
I often report on increases of 1 to 2%. 3 is big, but 15%. Where does that come from? And also to Max as well, you also mentioned inefficiencies in the process. I wonder what the inefficiencies are and where does a 15% increase come from? And I'm going to silence myself because I hear my neighbor's landscapers coming with the lawnmowers.
Mitch, it's a great question, and you're exactly right. The multiplying factor of being able to actually impact that on operating assets is huge. So there's a huge motivation for that. You can appreciate it's a big technology differentiator for us. So we don't obviously publish a lot of the fine details, but in our systems where we do a lot of purification through our pond evaporation systems, for example, and the ability to retain more of that lithium through our systems that we operate today and recover some of the lithium that would otherwise be precipitated in byproducts. That's part of the opportunity for us to better utilize the brine resource. That was just one example of where we're able to impact that new technology. And that's the type of math that we think about is every point of recovery efficiency in the processes in that value chain that I mentioned there. There's a lot of for every point of new efficiency at the global scale, it's like discovering a whole new resource, right? And so I think that's the type of opportunity that the ecosystem is increasingly going to focus on through the first time through, and then really at the end of life, that opportunity to recover it. Many of these chemistries and processes that these are the crown jewels for us. This is what makes us who we are today. Those same capabilities from a chemistry type standpoint make us really well suited to be able to take lithium at the end of life and bring it back into the value chain again, full loop recycle. Max,
Sure.
I think it was a follow-on for you then.
I do remember the question. So having had I chat with sort of cell manufacturers, and some anecdotal evidence is that a new player to the market in terms of battery manufacturing, in the first few years, there might be 40% of cells produced go to waste off the line, which is a huge amount of inefficiencies. And so for that reason, again, as I said before, they'll include recycling directly in the same sort of building or on the same site, just to make use of that. But really, cell manufacturing is like an art, basically. It's, you need a huge amount of experience to perfect it, and that's why we've seen the majors, the LG, Samsung, CATL, dominating the market, whilst we have, we're more skeptical about the utilization rate of some of the new players, and that's why we're taking a particularly keen interest on someone like Northvolt this year, who are completely new cell manufacturing, who are looking to build, up to 100 gigawatt hours of manufacturing capability this decade. And, obviously it's gained huge amounts of hype, but we do expect some inefficiencies with new players.
We've been getting some questions from the audience, and so I'd like to introduce some of those questions now and let the audience have their chance at getting answers here from our panelists. I think this one's from Mark Tuckerman, who asks about lithium battery technology. He mentions it's not the only potential up-and-coming player. Fuel cells, alternative battery constructs, many of them not yet proven, could impact the picture presented today. Should we push harder on these technologies in order to diversify our material needs and potentially reduce the looming demand for lithium? And I'd say, particularly in light of the shortfalls in meeting demand that Max Reid has talked about. Anybody on the panel want to take that up?
I could jump in with something quick. I don't have all the details, and I certainly, I don't come from the business end of things, but I could say that fuel cell research is alive and well. It was alive and well when I started with CNN, 25 years ago, and it was alive and well at least the last time I took a close look, which was about 2 years ago. And at that time, Toyota had already had the Mirai out. It's a hydrogen-powered fuel cell vehicle. It's almost, at least at that time, it was almost at the point that you could walk up to a dealer and buy one. I think it was a little bit specific at that time. It was available mainly on the West Coast because there were hydrogen filling stations. But as long as you were within range of where there were hydrogen filling stations, you could get such a car. And I believe there were also maybe a small number of filling stations on the East Coast, but there were plans afoot to build a large number of, well, relatively large number, not like gasoline petro stations, but there were efforts by plans by a lot of suppliers to put in hydrogen filling stations. And that's an alive and well area of research, but at the commercialization stage. I know at the research stage, National Labs have been working on this thing for a long time. There's big groups at Los Alamos and Sandia and the other labs in the US that are really pushing on fuel cell research. So it became a little bit less talked about in places like CB News over a little while, but it's alive and well. And the biggest thing, I'll just drop off at the last thing. The biggest thing has been that the amount of platinum that's being used has gone way down, making these things far more. Platinum is the catalytically active material that's driving the electrochemistry there. So that the amount has gone way down, and that's making them making these fuel cells more cost competitive than ever before.
Sure, I was just going to add on to that. So sodium-ion batteries have had a lot of interest as well since CATL announced their plans to commercialize it last year. And really they're very well placed because it's just a copy and paste of how to manufacture a lithium-ion battery. So uses the same structure, the same techniques, and obviously it doesn't use some of the critical materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel. But really we do see a small penetration of that into the market, and that's just because the supply chain's not developed enough. Lithium-ion batteries have been sort of helped by the use of portable electronics over the past 20 years now, whereas sodium-ion batteries are a complete infancy. So even manufacturing sodium-ion cathodes, is still, there's no major hub there. And I think one aspect or the status of it is shown by Tiamat, who plan something like 6 gigawatt hours of capacity by 2030, and that compares to lithium-ion batteries, which will be about 1,000 gigawatt hours capacity. So really small plans at the moment, it seems.
Yeah, I just build up on that. Like where lithium is on its learning curve, it's the accumulation of experience that you have to look at, and you see. Early in my career, I worked on all those different technologies, and I think there's more advancement to be had in all those alternatives. I think that's meritorious. I think we also have to realize as a society, like when you get on these learning curves, the opportunity for example, for silicon-based semiconductors, it becomes reinforcing. And the pipeline that we have for continued improvements in lithium is really striking. The opportunities, I think, still to double the energy densities from where we are today and to do it safely. These are the types of things. There's some pretty strong roadmaps out there that are already are going to really drive through continued efficiencies in the lithium battery. So that's the thing we need to think about is the dollars that are being invested today in lithium are continuing to even separate that distance even more. So it's something we got to keep in mind when we're planning for the future.
Very, very good. Another question that comes up, and now I don't know much about this, but I think David Turner, one of the listeners on the webinars, mentioned that the lithium industry in Mexico has been nationalized. Max, you seem to know about that as well as Glenn. What impact is that going to have on the global lithium supply? Any thoughts?
I have a quick thought. So the one interesting aspect of Mexico's sort of lithium reserves is it's in clay form, which is relatively, under commercialized at the moment. It's sort of yet to see large commercialization. So even before the plans for the president to nationalize it, it was still, more tentative just because it's yet to be done. I believe the plans are for any future projects are being maintained in-house essentially, but in the global scale, I think there's not a huge amount. It won't make a huge difference. It's sort of the tens of kilotons in 100 kiloton plus or 1,000 kiloton industry. Is my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I agree how Max characterized it. I think what it potentially could do is to insert some uncertainty in those developments and slow down bringing some of those non-conventional resources to the market.
Very, very good. Now, lithium, of course, we know is used in a variety of other places, among them drugs. We see so much emphasis on the growth of lithium for energy storage, but what about some of these other uses? Is there more than enough there, or do they become less important because of all the development effort going into the energy storage market? I think this is from Raphael on the who's listening in.
Yeah, sure. So we obviously include the traditional sectors in our lithium demand forecasts, and we do expect to see growth naturally. Something that's interesting is obviously it doesn't take battery grade lithium chemicals. It sort of uses less pure chemicals, and we do see growth. So I think from my slide there was 64 kilotons lithium carbonate equivalent from today to 2040. So yes, there is growth in annual demand, but not on the scale of like lithium-ion batteries, portable electronics, and then obviously the major ones.
Yeah, I would just add, technically, lithium is a pretty special atom. It can do some pretty phenomenal things in some of the pharmaceutical and some of these other synthesis pathways in advanced materials. So it's going to continue to receive demand, as Max mentioned, on those fronts.
And Glenn, does Albemarle put any effort behind developing lithium for medical uses, any special projects or research efforts in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a specialties division within our lithium, and we play into the advanced materials and pharmaceuticals and ag businesses. It's I think it's really important that we learn a tremendous amount of how to derivatize the lithium molecule into many different forms, and those then become enablers to even higher performance forms of lithium for batteries in the future as well. So it's a pretty virtuous ecosystem that we have.
Excellent. Any final words from anybody here on the panel about the present situation and what we're looking forward to in the future?
Exciting times. It's just
Very exciting, yeah.
unprecedented in a way that we're gonna see a transformation happen over the course of the next 5 and 10 years that is just phenomenal. It's great to be part of it.
And I'm always looking for the next story idea. So if you have something cool, share it with me.
Thank you all for your time today. Really do appreciate you being here.
And I just want to thank Mark for putting this marvelous panel together and all the panelists, and remind everyone to register for the June 6th Societe Webcast on major trends in innovation in green chemistry and circular chemistry, another exciting growth area. So thank you all, and we all look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.